Good evening, everybody, to Thursday Garden Chat, and for those of you who'll be watching this on YouTube whenever, because I know most of you do these days. Good morning, good evening, whatever time of day you're watching it. Garden Masterclass at the moment, we are taking a bit of an August break, getting things ready for our autumn and winter programme. If you're in Britain, we do have some live events still happening this autumn, some of which are rescheduled from previously, so do please take a look. And look also at our membership scheme. If you're not already a member, consider joining us. The main news really, I think, is probably 2-week-old news now, that we've done a big revamp on the website with a much more easily accessible diary of events. So webinars and live events will be on the same page. And we're forging ahead with all sorts of exciting developments, which we'll gradually reveal to you over the next few months. This evening, we are talking essentially about Chinese gardens with an old friend of mine, Lei Gao, who I met probably about 15 years ago in Sheffield. And China, of course, has an immensely old garden tradition. The Chinese were building gardens and debating landscape, about 1,000 years before we did. China, let's face it, has been perhaps the dominant world culture. So when the first Europeans encountered China in the late 16th century, they were astounded at this sophisticated civilization and were really quite in awe of it. And there followed several centuries of a kind of fascination, almost obsession with China, which is illustrated by my dresser behind me with our collection of English ceramics, most of them early 19th century, but all of them with Chinese iconography. For several centuries, all elite Europeans and many other aspiring poorer people were confronted on a daily basis by the iconography of Chinese gardens whenever they sat down to eat their supper. And I find this whole view of China, in particular Chinese gardens and Chinese landscapes through ceramics, really fascinating. Now, the irony was that whilst European factories are churning out these pseudo-Chinese ceramics, as well as continuing to import vast amounts of ceramics from China, the China-Europe relationship rapidly went downhill. In one of those kind of bad luck stories of history, China went through a bit of a bad period with the Ming and the Qing dynasties increasingly turning inward, a failure to innovate, the various problems of peasant revolts and everything else that happens in Chinese history. And European powers, particularly Britain and France, took huge advantage of China. And there's really, to understand modern China, you have to understand how humiliated the Chinese felt by the unequal treaties of the 19th century, by the Opium Wars, and also by the incident that Lei is going to tell us about today, which concerns the Yuan Ming Yuan garden. So over to Lei, who, as I said, about 15 years ago, when she was doing her PhD, we were both doing PhDs at Sheffield, always a fascinating person to talk to, and somebody who is engaged so well with the whole China-West dialogue. Now, Lei, you are an associate professor of landscape history at the University of Aarhus in Norway. So perhaps first of all, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself and say perhaps how come you're in Norway?
Oh, yes, yeah. I got my PhD from Sheffield, and after that, I briefly worked in China in the university. But meanwhile, I'm still very interested in the topic about the garden history and historical landscape management. So in 2013, there is an opportunity for a postdoc fellowship in the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. So I applied for that position, and very luckily I got the position. I came here, and and then I have been doing research here for several years, and only recently I become associate professor. It's I don't know, maybe it's not many places they have this research group which focusing on the historical landscapes and heritage landscape management. So I feel very lucky to to have such a place which really match my interests. Yeah.
Great. So, perhaps would you like to share your presentation, and
Yes.
we'll hear about the Yuan Ming Yuan.
Yeah. I hope now you can see the.
Yes, perfect. Great. Fantastic.
Yeah, it shows a beautiful, beautiful garden and building complex. And this is Yuan Ming Yuan, but only a small section of it. And this is also my topic today. First, I'd like to talk about what is Yuan Ming Yuan. So Yuan Ming Yuan in Chinese, it literally means round or perfect and bright and garden. So it can be translated as the gardens of perfect brightness. It is also known as the Old Summer Palace. And these are the pinyin and the old way of pinyin system, which can be seen in the 18th and 19th century. So it was first constructed in early 18th century, and it has been used as the Qing Emperor's summer palace, administration center, and imperial residence. And 5 emperors lived here between 1720s to 1860. And this is one of the hundreds of gardens within the Gardens of Perfect Brightness. But in 1860, during the Second Opium War, the Yuan Ming Yuan was looted and burned down by Anglo-French expeditionary forces. And this is the ruins of part of it. And after that, there are diverse meanings being instilled to Yuan Ming Yuan. Say, for example, it has been used as the educational base to teach the Chinese, forget not the national humiliation. This is an image from early 1980s. And today it is a public park and also a relics park and archaeological park, which I will refer to later on. And people often say Yuan Ming Yuan as the Versailles in the East. So here I will use Versailles as a comparison, and I hope this will make you understand easier for Yuan Ming Yuan's the position. So if you look at the time, the origin, Yuan Ming Yuan is about 80 years later than Versailles. So, and the location is kind of interestingly similar. Versailles is in the west of Paris. It's about 19 kilometers in distance. And Yuan Ming Yuan is in the northwest of Beijing. Again, the distance between Yuan Ming Yuan and the Forbidden City is the 19 kilometers. And here's the map shows Versailles to Paris and Yuan Ming Yuan to Beijing. Because the emperor, they are Manchurian, the Qing emperors, so they can't bear the hot summer in the central Beijing. Therefore, they find the more remote place in the mountainside of the northwest suburb of Beijing and build many gardens there. And Yuan Ming Yuan is one of them and the most well-known garden at the time. Again, let's look at the founder. Yuan Ming Yuan was founded by, Versailles was established by Louis XIV from 1661 to 1668. And afterwards, it has been used as the political center until the French Revolution in 1789. And Yuan Ming Yuan has been built by Emperor Yongzheng in 1720s, and beforehand it was a prince garden, and with a relatively small size and moderate scale, and the building style is quite simple. And when Yongzheng became the emperor in 1723, he started to expand Yuan Ming Yuan and add more features on the side. And after him, his son, Emperor Qianlong, who is the most important person to the Yuan Ming Yuan construction. So he again expanded Yuan Ming Yuan and enriched the constructions there, the views there, and also many features. He also expanded the area, which later I can show the map. And after him, there are another 3 emperors used the Yuan Ming Yuan as the main residence. First during the summer, but then it extended to most time of the year. And some emperors even used Yuan Ming Yuan for longer time than he lived in. He stayed in the Forbidden City. And yeah, it has been used as for this purpose until 1860. So here there are two portraits of the most influential person to these gardens. You can see the difference, and something in common, that is the show of power. Yeah, I'm not going to open it too much. I just give the image. And here are the maps of Versailles and Yuan Ming Yuan. Again, immediately you may depict the differences about European formal gardens and the Chinese informal gardens, as people said. And this is the Yuan Ming Yuan proper. And then later on, it has been added this part and this part. It also shows, these two pictures also have the same scale, so you can compare the size of them. And it is easy to find the picture which shows the panorama of Versailles. And this picture also shows clearly the intention of design. That is, the central axis dominates the whole layout, which shows kind of human power dominant the rural nature. But for Yuan Ming Yuan, it is very difficult to find one view which shows the whole image of the gardens. Instead, there is an album existed which shows the image of Yuan Ming Yuan in 40 pictures, 40 images, and the size, the diameter, the width is about 86 centimeters. So you know the scale. And now let's look at them in more details. And this is the first page, which shows the court of administration, where the emperor will have the formal ceremonies here. And this is for domestic administration, for emperor's daily work on domestic issues. And this is the residential quarters for the emperor and his families. And there are libraries, study, and the theater. Also the family shrine, and the Buddhist and Taoist temples, and more exaggerated size. There are also Buddhist temples within, but the whole scenery was designed after the famous Chinese legendary about immortal mountains in the East Sea. So it also has the Taoist tradition in it. And this is the place where the emperors and princes train archery and horse riding, since they're Manchurians, and this is an important part of their life. And also some views depicted the countryside views, the fields, the rice fields, and apricot blossom groves. And again, some sceneries were modeled after the Chinese literature. This is there is a well-known stories behind this view. Talked about another world, and another world behind the mountains, which is shows kind of ideal life in peace. And this is a view which modeled after the West Lake in Hangzhou, since the Emperor Qianlong had 6 travel trips to the southern China in the lower Yangtze Delta, where the Scholar Gardens is very well known. And there are many excellent scholar gardens there, and the Qianlong Emperor visited, and he admired their artistic standard, artistic quality. Therefore, he also kind of used the theme and recreated in his own garden. So you can say Yuan Ming Yuan is a kind of collection of gardens in China. So there are 40 images. These are the names of the 40 scenes. All names were given by the Emperor Qianlong. So if we group them into different themes, we can see some are for administration purposes and some for residences. And also there are many libraries and studies and many places for agriculture, and also for the Buddhist and Taoist temples and family shrine. So here you can see there is a reason behind why there are so many libraries and agriculture. This is because the Confucian values, which highly valued the self-cultivation and the agriculture as the key for personal enlightenment and also for the physical sustainability in a way. And the most features, again here, there's 15, were inspired from the natural, historical, or legendary sceneries, which all have their literature behind it, since the emperor liked to read and also he liked to visit different places. So he found all this very interesting and moved them into his own garden. You can see it is a kind of ideal world created by the emperor in a heyday of China. And it shows the 40 scenes, the location. And yeah, this is very interesting source. Maybe you can visit it yourself. It's an interactive map where when you click on the number, you will see the image. But that is just one part of Yuan Ming Yuan. This section is called Yuan Ming Yuan, and later on, Emperor Qianlong also created another section called Changchun Yuan, and he made this section as his own garden after retirement. Although that is like 40 years before his retirement, he has finished this part. And later on, he also got back the other princely gardens and private gardens and grouped them into the third section of Yuan Ming Yuan called Qichun Yuan. So the three sections altogether, they have the name Yuan Ming Yuan. Now let's have a look at this part, Changchun Yuan. Since Yuan Ming Yuan was expanded based on the previous emperor layout, so Changchun Yuan is the real design by Emperor Qianlong. And here you can see some interesting point. Although it is said the garden was kind of similar, like the classical Chinese gardens have an irregular shape and asymmetrical layout, but actually it's quite different from the scholar gardens in the Southeast China. And this is a layout of a scholar garden, the humble administrator's garden in Suzhou. But if I put them into the same scale, it will be much smaller, will be like this size, 1/5 of it. So here you can see it's really irregular and asymmetrical. They try to avoid the central axis. But here, even though the lines are irregular, but still you can see there is an axis and controlled the whole layout. So you can see this kind of balanced design features, although the axis has a turn. This is the entrance, there's a central axis, and then here it turned leftward and have another axis control the whole garden. Yeah, so I would call it a Chinese way of formal garden formality. Yeah, and also in the north part of Changchun Yuan, there is a small section which is quite interesting because it is called the European palaces. Yeah, because at that time, there are many Jesuit missionaries from Europe. They came to China. Although they tried to convince the emperor to believe in Christianity, but they failed in this purpose. Instead, the emperors found it's very interesting to learn from them the European techniques, like the garden art, the building architecture techniques, etc., etc. So when Emperor Qianlong was presented some European palaces and the water features, he was interested and ordered the Jesuit missionaries to make similar features in his own garden. That comes the Xiyanglou, or say the Western palaces. And this is the layout. And we can look at a few features here. First, the labyrinths. And this is the copper plate printing from the 18th century, not long after this section has been constructed. Yeah, it shows the labyrinths, but not made by the not made by the plants. Instead, it's made by the bricks. And this is this is the reconstruction made in 1980s, I think. And yeah, it becomes one of the popular sites for the tourists in Yuan Ming Yuan. It's very interesting to go through these labyrinths and very difficult to get to the center. And there are also some water features, the fountains. There are 3 main sites for fountains, here, here, and here. We will look at 2 of them. First, let's look at this one. This is also the first palace, European palace, constructed on this site. And this is the view from the north. And this is the digital reconstitution of the view. And it's quite authentic, because they based on the archives and the many resources and archaeological discoveries as well. And this is the south front, the south facade of the same palace. And Emperor Qianlong also had the Chinese musicians trained by the Western missionary Jesuits for the orchestra. So they have some musical musical show here. And this part, another fountains, water features, the reconstruction, digital reconstruction. So behind there is a building, and on the top of the roof, it is a very big water tank which holds the water. And then they can use this level difference to make the fountains. And this is the reconstruction of the automata, the kind of water features, how it works. It actually used the mules to pull the water wheel and then to lift up the water to the tank, to the water tank, and then to get the fountains. Yeah, but also from the archives from that time, this mechanics doesn't work really well. After the designer for the fountains were the French missionaries and a mathematician called Michel Benoit, and he died in 1770s. So after his death, the maintenance become an issue. It's very difficult. Nobody, they can hardly find people to restore, maintain it. And also it cost a lot using the mules to pull the mill and to get the water up to the tank. So this is a report from the officers who managing taking care of the water features. And they said, actually they found a cheaper way to get the water onto the tank. That is to use the winches. That is more traditional Chinese way to lift up the water. So you can see already it is difficult to, although it might be easy to make this European mechanics, but it's difficult to maintain it. So they return to the Chinese method soon, and it's cheaper. I think it's more cost effective. And also in the emperor's poems in 1790s, it also shows at that time the water leakage has already become a problem. So most of the time, the fountains are not working. So only when the emperor is to visit the place, and then the officers immediately employ the people to carry on the water and fill in the tank and had fountain work for 2 hours during the emperor's visit. So this is what they were doing at the time. Yeah, and then before this image, maybe I can say some background. Because during the 18th century, at that time, the British, let's try to just to read it here. Yeah. In 1793 and 1816, Britain sent 2 diplomatic teams to seek trade communication with China. However, not being interested in the British proposal and being angered by British ambassadors' failure to observe court rituals correctly, the Chinese emperor's attitude towards the West took a U-turn. And same for the British view to China. So there are some archives which we can see from them. They revealed kind of increasing misunderstanding between China and the Western countries since the end 18th century. And following, I will show some poems written by the emperor. And this is a poem by Emperor Qianlong, written 2 years after the first embassy from Britain. Yeah, this is the image of that showing that visit, and they brought many gifts to the emperor, like this planetarium and many other instruments, and including cannons and carriages, etc. They intended to show the advanced technologies in Britain, in the Western world, but Chinese emperor didn't see this as very precious or interesting in a way. And here, the poem said by Emperor Qianlong, that said, "A water features provide a marvelous display. When overseas ambassadors arrive for their celebrations, I will have them assembled here and to let them admire." So the Emperor Qianlong only want to show these European palaces to the foreign envoys and to admire them. And in the commentary written by Emperor Qianlong following this poem, he also said, he briefly described about the British ambassadors came to the capital, he said, to pay the tribute, which again is different view from China and from the British side. And here it says, what the emperor I'm delighted with is the subject's sincerity of hoping to be cultivated. So Emperor Qianlong interpreted their visit as they come to China to learn and to be cultivated instead of a kind of more equal communication. And again, Emperor Qianlong said, if thinking of the tributes of their national products only, then there's nothing special that can't be found in the vast land of China. So I have not considered the water features as so precious from the outset. Yeah. Also, there is, this is another view from the 1793, the embassy. It shows a little boy who is the son of the secretary of the envoy, and he's kneeling to the emperor to receive the gift. So about kneeling, and this is Koto. Koto is a Chinese ritual, which is you have to use both the hands and also the forehead touch the ground to show your respect. But then it is not accepted. It is unacceptable by the British envoy, so they avoid doing so. But then it makes Chinese very angry at the time. So again, there's another embassy in 1816. It's kind of failed because of the same reason. And this is a poem written by Emperor Jiaqing, that is the son of Emperor Qianlong. This is a poem about the European palaces, the water features. And you can see here, Emperor Jiaqing said, "How can the Grand Emperor give importance to material treasures? What I am proud of is virtues and care for dominance only." So here you can see the values are really different. And also in the commentary, Emperor Jiaqing mentioned about the second embassy. It says, "It is important to be strict when educating and governing the distant lands of the empire." So he treats the Britain as a kind of distant land of the empire. And he said, "My point said that China has an impressive manner. How can it be even slightly degraded? Those English ambassadors are vulgar and ignorant, greedy and stubborn. Also, they didn't follow the proper rituals, thereby disgraced the mission of their king. Based on the reason above, I refused their tributes and had them repatriated. Herein lies the principles for managing the state, treating rituals as great treasures, treating virtuousness as measures of a governor." Yeah, again, there are many accounts about from the British side, such as this book written by Stoughton, the secretary of the 1793 embassy. And they also talked about their view towards the China. But yeah, sorry, I haven't got the original text posted here. Yeah, here I just quote another scholar's article. It says about this kind of tributary system. It was established 2,000 years ago in China. Therefore, the British gifts presented to encourage trade were interpreted by the Chinese in accordance with this ancient system, that is, as tribute from a barbaric vassal state to the civilized center. So both Britain and China were convinced of their own civilized and superior position, and surprisingly, this impulse coupled with financial incentives for the British led to the war. So in 1860, it comes the Second Opium War. And during this time, Yuan Ming Yuan was first looted and then burned. And this is I couldn't find the images produced at that time to show the looting, especially the burning of Yuan Ming Yuan. So this is just a picture drawn by Chinese, I assume, in today's time. Yeah, but there is a image from 1861 which shows a French soldier leading a Chinese porter with the loot, and they carried a lot of goods from Yuan Ming Yuan. And some of them went to the French museums. This is the museum for the Empress in France. And also, again, today you can find many objects scattered in different museums around the world. And after the looting, there comes to the burning. Because the time is quite limited, so I'm not going to the details about the reason of it. Yeah, this is the after the burning stage. And there's a very good book written by a French writer, and he mined the over 70 books in English and French original archives, and then based on that wrote it's about the sack of the palace, the old palace during the Second Opium War. And it's been published into Chinese as well, translated into Chinese as well. But I didn't find the English version, so maybe there's no English version. Yeah, but again, from the images, from the front cover, you can see the different focuses in the Chinese view and the Western view. Yeah, so I encourage you to read this if you're interested. Oh, yeah, and can read in French. So after that, Yuan Ming Yuan, there were several attempts to restore Yuan Ming Yuan. However, it's all failed because at the time the economic situation in China was getting worse, and there are also inner wars. So eventually, imperial court, the imperial family, they gave up Yuan Ming Yuan, and then it was not until 1930s the Chinese start to look at Yuan Ming Yuan again as their national cultural heritage. And in 1931, there is an exhibition held in the Central Park in Beijing, which shows the relics like the stones collected from the site, and also the archives, the literature about this place. It generated a great interest, and it was planned as one-day exhibition, but then extended to 2 days. And meanwhile, the China Society of Architecture, they were founded, and the first works, one of the first works they have been doing was the archival studies of Yuan Ming Yuan. And at that time, the Beijing Bureau of Civil Engineering, they also had a survey of the site and published a map which shows all the landforms, the water features, the hills, earthworks, and also the building sites of Yuan Ming Yuan. And these buildings marked in yellow means they have been destroyed and not there anymore. And the few red ones are the contemporary constructions found on the site. At that time, also in the West, there are some publications about Yuan Ming Yuan, such as this one. The image shows the Call of Administration in 18th century, and then the 1930s situation of the same site. It became a storage place. Yeah, and after the founding of People's Republic of China, it comes to a series of political campaigns, and then the site again was influenced. Like in early 1950s, under the socialist reform, the land of Yuan Ming Yuan was partly distributed to various working units for the productive use, and then turned into the rice fields, and also factories were built upon the site. And these are some photos taken in the early 1980s. It shows the Yuan Ming Yuan before it's been a public park. And from 1980s, at that time, the open door policy was launched in China. So the situation changed a bit. The economic development became the focus. And in 1980, there is a founding, the Yuan Ming Yuan Society of China was founded. And there are a group of scholars. They focus on the Yuan Ming Yuan studies. And also in early 1980s, the European palaces, that small part, because they have relatively more remains left, like the stoneworks. So some of the stoneworks were repiled and reconstructed, just piled up, and made it make more sense as kind of European palaces, the sections. So they were opened as a relics park. So for a long time, Yuan Ming Yuan Chinese image is like this. So people know, oh, there are some European palaces in Yuan Ming Yuan, but the Chinese part hasn't been emphasized at that time. And also, since previously the site has been used as the farming land, so there are many farmers relied on the land to make a living. When Yuan Ming Yuan turned into a park in 1988, they adopt all these farmers and made them into the workers of Yuan Ming Yuan. Therefore, they have to make money for this. So struggling for this kind of economic balance. Therefore, there are some misuse, such as this kind of thematic garden within the park, called the dinosaur world, etc., etc. Yeah, when it comes to the 1990s, economic situation becomes better in China, and there's a discussion or the debate about what shall we do with this site? Shall we preserve the red site, or shall we restore the gardens? And as a result, we decided to make Yuan Ming Yuan as a relict park. That means to keep the building sites as the relict, not to reconstruct the building, but then to kind of restore. although it's not kind of authentic restore, to reorganize the landscapes to make it more like a park. So this is the result. And part of the buildings, like this is the front gate of Qichunyuan, one of the gardens, were reconstructed as the gate of the park. Yeah, and meanwhile, there are more people start to study Yuan Ming Yuan, the archives, and then Yuan Ming Yuan also reflected some contemporary issues happening in China, such as this. This is the newspaper article. It talks about, because in 2005, the park administration, they wanted to keep the water, because at the time Beijing was become very dry and the water can hardly be kept on the lake. So their intention was to have the plastic membranes paved on the bottom of the lake to keep the water. But then this was seen by a professor. So he said, oh, this kind of destroyed the environment. It will cause ecological disaster. And then there's a lot of debate on this as well. And also a playwright was employed by the environmental organization to write a drama about the Yuan Ming Yuan. So what the playwright asked indeed is, who on earth destroyed Yuan Ming Yuan? And he shows Yuan Ming Yuan is not only destroyed by the Westerners, but also by the Chinese themselves, and also this kind of destruction of the Chinese traditional culture also make a part. Yeah, so many issues shown through the Yuan Ming Yuan discussion. Yeah, but then at the same time, the scholars, academics also doing a laborious work, such as this one. It is led by a Tsinghua University professor in architecture, and she and Guo Daiheng and her team, they reconstructed Yuan Ming Yuan digitally. So here, now their focus is not only on the European palaces, but also the whole part of Yuan Ming Yuan. So here you can see a few images. Yeah, not only outside, but also interiors. And I would say this is very authentic reconstruction, because they have been mining through all the archives, etc., and also archaeological discoveries, and try to make it as authentic as possible. And here, there is a 3-minute video, which I would like to share with you. And the Professor Guo Daiheng is also depicted here. You can see her.
可以说圆明园是当时的政治中心。有的皇帝在这里1年可以住150天，甚至于住300天。这里他就决定了很多国家的大事。 文字档案，有这个图的档案。这图呢，因为古代工匠留下了一些图纸，那我们就到处都去找这些资料。现在呢，这3D 的东西已经做了60%的景区，已经做成了一个现场可以看的，可以借这个手机去走一个地方就看这个景观，或者用 iPad 导览，可以360度的看。 中国园林的一个特点就是把若干个不同的景区放在一个园林当中，其中有山有水，彼此相隔。那么他走过一个景区以后，再到另外一个景区， 这样的不断的改变景区。圆明园里边所包含的景物，是中国人民创造的一切都包含在里边。有一些人提出来要复建圆明园，但是我觉得他们这些人不了解什么是文化遗产，它是一个历史信息的载体，被烧毁也是它的重要的历史信息的一部分。所以复建就等于抹掉了这个历史信息，那这遗迹就是我们要保护的对象。对于中国人来讲，是一个历史的伤痛。那时候，这些统治者非常没落，非常无能。由于他闭关自守，所以他自己也不知道他的问题。外国人来了以后闯进来，他就没有办法，没法抵抗。如果大家不记得那样一个历史的话，那最后可能中国还会变成那样。
Yes, this is the end of my presentation. Thank you. I will stop sharing the screen.
Thank you, Lei. That was fascinating and really interesting to be brought up to date. You know, all those years at Sheffield, and you were always talking about this and all this discussion. And of course, digital reconstruction is a wonderful way of sort of choosing this middle path of kind of having our cake and eat it in a way. You know, have our ruins and the real thing. Extraordinary reconstructions, and no doubt there will be future technologies. Oh dear, what am I thinking of? Virtual reality, where it will make it even more astounding. Interesting. Now, we've got a couple of questions coming up, but I'd just like to ask really about the function of Yuan Ming Yuan during the imperial period, because you know, you're making these comparisons with the Versailles, which are, you know, very interesting and I think very useful for us to kind of frame and understand Yuan Ming Yuan. But Versailles, of course, was used really very effectively for displays of power by the French monarchy, that you'd have these fêtes champêtres, these massive events whereby all the aristocracy and all the people who needed to be impressed would come along, and there'd be fireworks, and you know, there'd be boats on the water fighting mock battles and fantastic food and all the rest of it, and people would come away with this very clear political message of the power of Louis XIV or whoever. So the Guards, in other words, had a very important role in terms of structuring and displaying power. Was that true for Yuan Ming Yuan, or was the functions in fact completely different?
Yes, it's kind of the same, but not many people have this privilege to view the whole garden. So for the foreign envoys, for example, maybe what they can see is the front part, the very small part of the hall of administration, that front court. And then perhaps are the European palaces and only the small section of the gardens. So still the emperors, they kept the major part of Yuan Ming Yuan as their own private garden. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yes.
But again, there are very lively lives happening in Yuan Ming Yuan. Emperors can enjoy themselves for different things. For example, there is even a market, a market created just for emperors to enjoy. What is the market life, since he cannot easily go out?
I see. How wonderful. Mock real life is mock poor people. Very interesting. Yeah. There's a question about the water leakage issue that you mentioned, and of course, you know, Versailles had its water problems. All that water for fountains had to be brought over a whole range of hills, and there was just, I think that caused all sorts of problems. And so the question is that really whether there are inherent design flaws that resulted in the water leakage. I mean, was water being monopolized? I know water has been a hugely important issue throughout Chinese history, that the management of water. Did the design use more water than would naturally be available in the area? We've lost your sound, Lei.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't read the question. Is that the water issues in the European palaces for the fountains, all the water later on, the water leakage and the membrane paving, or the both?
Well, the question is, were there inherent design flaws that resulted in water leakage? Did the design use more water than would naturally be available?
Yeah, actually, the site previously, because there are mountains nearby, so there are abundant water resources at nearby. So it wasn't an issue in the 18th century.
No.
But in the 21st century, 21st century, because the underground water in Beijing has been overused, and therefore the level has been getting down year after year, and then it's an issue. Today it's really dry. Once I talked with the Renmin Park administrator, and he said every year they have to pay a lot of money to get this kind of tap water filled in the lake. That's why they have to use other methods. Historically, no need for this.
No. But as so often the case, water tables have been brought down by too much abstraction. Great, and comment from Wendy. Oh, here we are. Fascinating, and really brings up the thorny issues of reconstruction versus the historical value of the ruins. She also wants to know, was there an estimate of how many people would inhabit the Summer Palace and its buildings at any one time? The digital reconstruction appears to make it look like a small city.
Yes, it's huge because it's like 3.5 square kilometers. But I do not know exactly how many people living in that places. I think the central person is the emperor, and then his wives, his sons and daughters, the whole family. That will be a big family. And then to support the family's life, they need a lot of workers. So yeah, the people work in the court, they lived there. And they also have a small team of Western missionaries who worked as the artists, mechanicians, etc., etc. They also lived in Yuan Ming Yuan in a small corner.
And you mentioned early on the various scenes, 6 of which showed agriculture. So presumably, and this was my understanding of a lot of historic Chinese gardens anyway, that like a lot of Western gardens also, there was quite a lot of food production, elite level food production going on, which of course doesn't usually get shown in historic images. So there were a lot of sort of what we would call kitchen gardens as well, presumably, and that their workforce.
Yeah, it could be, although I don't know the varieties, what type of plants they grow there, except for the rice growing, because there was records showing that in one rice field, it used to be not that good, but then after a building was built there, and the rice production suddenly goes up, that shows actually the emperors also care about the rice production on the side. But I don't know how much in quantity and how many varieties. But from the plants, you can see some fruit plants there.
Yes, great. Okay. Well, I think that brings us to the end. No one's got anything else to say. Well, thank you very much, Lei. I've been meaning to ask you to do this for some time, and really glad to have brought the whole story up to date. I think it's one of the most interesting and significant garden history stories there is. Does raise a lot of very, very important issues. And so, well, hoping we might meet up again one day before too long. Would love to see you somewhere. Well, all the best, and we'll keep in touch. And everybody else, we'll hopefully see you all next Thursday.
And thank you all for your attention and your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.